Getting your full rate every time as a freelance crew member, or in my case, as a director of photography. I had this question on one of my videos, and I've also received several direct emails that are essentially the same thing, like, what do I charge? What's your rate? And I want to run you through a few conditions and scenarios that determine what you should charge. First, a little about me. I have been working full-time in media as a freelancer or project-based for 22 years, and prior to that I was in college and high school, and through all of that time I also worked part-time and or volunteered on various productions. When I get an inquiry for work, I've distilled that down into 3 typical scenarios. One is, and these are usually last minute, it's for like tomorrow or 3 days from now, but it's are you available on this date and it pays this amount? And generally those jobs, if it's not someone I have an ongoing relationship with, it's generally a lower wage, and they're hedging that if you're available, you're going to jump on the low rate because it's 24, 48 hours out. And I take those sometimes. I'll give you the classic example is it pays $500. And then inevitably I accept it, and then I get a phone call for like a full kit kind of day for me, say a $2,500 job, and then you're faced with trying to get out of the low rate thing, which burns bridges and word travels fast, or do you just suck it up and like, all right, I made a commitment, I gotta follow through on my word, and really that's the right thing to do. So earlier on in my career, I would jump on those last minute low rate things because I was just trying to fill dates and earn a wage. And then as I built my own client base that were paying me for my specialty of services, I learned it's best to pass on those. And quite often I get rewarded with another booking that's closer to what I want to be charging. Now there's an exception to that scenario where I will always say yes, and that's if I'm available and it's covering for a colleague. They get in a jam, they're sick, some circumstance that created an unintended double booking. In those cases, really the rate is secondary. I'm going to take care of that person because in the future I'm going to be in a bind and I'm going to need the same thing. Now, number 2 is something that happens organically once you've been in the business for a year or more working in the same role, is you'll start to get referrals and phone calls from repeat customers that are, hey, hold these dates for me if you're available, and here's the basic scope, can you send over an estimate? Now that's wonderful, but it can also be stressful. I've been in situations where I get that phone call and then I get another call from another prospect, and it's the same dates and sounds like similar scope of work. And I'll put both estimates together and then later discover that both of those producers or production companies were bidding on the same end job. And I want to take care of both. Whomever gets it, great. That just increases my odds that I'm going to book if I've got 2 people going to bat and I'm one of the people submitting. But the flip of that is if they don't even have the job landed yet, they're probably price shopping to do their own RFP, which means they've also called some other people that are working my role to get competing rates. So I've found now I just kind of stick to it. Here are my numbers for that scope. We can adjust it based on the creative or the gear, and I'm willing to move a little bit, based on how busy I am, how difficult or maybe creatively rewarding I think the project is. But at the same time, I got to be careful because number 3, and these are the ones that I pay my bills long term and I'm able to save and grow my business and feed my family, is existing clients, and they don't even talk numbers because I've worked for them so much. We've got a rate established and it's, hey, I got this job coming up on these dates, hold them for me. So I always accommodate number 3 above the previous 2. And the balancing act there is with those number 2 type of new business things is I really have to get a deposit from someone and a firm commitment before I'm going to give them a solid hold. Now, actual numbers, I'm not going to get into specific dollar amounts. I'm in the US dollars, that I'm charging today, which is the 4th quarter 2020, but more of the concept of how you want to establish a rate and really just be consistent about it. So when I started out, I was charging about $300 to go out with a camera and shoot, or maybe that was just my labor and the production was providing a camera. But I was new, limited experience, and of course this is also like 20 years ago. So I could pretty consistently get $300 as a wage as a freelancer to go out and cover something for somebody. And then over time, those early clients that you're working $300 for, they become repeat clients. You've got this legacy client rate with them. And I have some customers that go back 20 years that I still work for. And I've slowly increased the rate with those customers, but short term, 1, 2, 3 years, I honor that previous number that I established with them. And then next is you have your new business rate, and that's where you can kind of test the market and try to get as your experience builds, get your rate up a bit. And that's those number 2 phone calls where I'm putting together an estimate off of a referral, or just a blind call. That's when I'm going to try to bump it up to the new number that I aspire to charge going forward. And then as your calendar fills up, you need to start thinking about retiring those older early clients. If I'm now consistently billing $650 a day, but my calendar is conflicting with lots of $300 legacy billings, that's when I need to gently start the communication with that older client, where I either got to retire them out, they've got to find someone new and less experienced, and maybe I help facilitate that introduction, or I try to push them to kind of increase the rate a little bit to what I'm charging today for new business. And that goes either way. I don't think for me there's really been any consistency. Well, no, I will say in most cases that $300 client is probably always going to be a $300 client, and that's when you have to just gently move on. In the media production environment, and again, my perspective is from being in the camera department, and I also spent a bunch of time on the lighting side, and the bulk of my career has been in the Los Angeles market and almost exclusively non-union. It's actually the space I prefer to work in. That's a whole other topic I could make another video on in the future. But there are 3 types of workday for crew members. One is prevalent in Los Angeles and New York, and actually I've run into it in Atlanta pretty consistently, and that's the 12-hour workday plus a 1-hour lunch. So you're on site for 13 hours, and I find that most of those projects are non-union, low-budget commercials or industrials, low-budget features, maybe mid-range and up, possibly all features. I have limited experience in that space. But for me, in my body of work, that typically means they're really stretched on budget, and or they may be, quite often they're very inexperienced. It's their first couple of years in the business, maybe right out of a degree in advertising or marketing, and they're just trying to squeeze as much creative into a day with a very limited budget. And I've found for me, being several years into this, because I work on 1-day, 2-day, 3-day shoots, and I'll try to stack 2 or 3 different projects into a calendar week. If I'm 13 hours on site for each of those, by the time I get to my second client on day 2 or 3, I am just physically and emotionally spent. It's just too grueling. You get a factor in the commute time, particularly in Southern California. Quite often it's 90 minutes plus of a commute on each side. So those 13 hours on site with that dreaded 1-hour lunch, usually it ends up being 16 hours door to door for me from my house. And I can do 1 or 2 of those in a week, but to try to fill 4 or 5 days of that, it takes me the same amount of days to physically recover from it. Now, the next and most common rate structure for mid-size and bigger productions is a 10-hour on-site day, 30-minute lunch, so you're there for 10.5 hours getting paid for 10. Now, the comp on those is usually worked on what's called a guarantee. And that falls back, I think, from kind of the union terms, which is you work an 8-hour day at your established wage, and then hours 9 and 10 are time and a half. And so what a lot of these mid-range productions do is they guarantee, I'm going to pay you for 10 hours, even if we only use you for 8 or 6 or whichever. Now, for me, that 10-hour day on a mid-sized production, it works out with my commute time to about a 13.5-hour day. That's still pretty brutal, especially if I'm doing a lot of camera repositioning or handheld. And as I'm getting older, I'm doing my best to stay fit, but being in my 40s now, those days too take their toll. And then the stress factor of getting back in the truck and driving home, crawling for 2 hours, all this physical exertion, and then I'm sitting in a seat in a fixed position for 2 hours. that combination, it just tweaks my body with the cumulative days of work. And the third one, which is the dread of many people in production, I used to hate it and then I figured out how to embrace it, but it's you get the call for the job, you quote them a 10-hour package rate or day rate, and then they come back and they're like, well, you know what, I really don't have 10 hours of stuff to shoot. I mean, we're just in an office, we're gonna shoot some people in a conference room, I got a couple of interviews. You know, what's your half day rate? And the challenge with the half day rate is, in my career, I have only had one day that I was successfully able to book a morning half day assignment and pick up a second afternoon half day assignment to make myself whole for the day. In every other case, the half day rate, when I've accepted, once I get the call sheet, it ends up being something like 10 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And now it's like, that's not half of the day. Yeah, okay, it's half the day, but like, I need you to be in the morning or the afternoon. Like, let me get out and get back for lunch, or I go out after lunchtime. That gives me an opportunity to schedule some other business in the remaining block of that day. But the middle day, half day rate thing, it doesn't work. And I found too, as I've built clients, when I accept one of those things, it guarantees I get a call for another normal full day of work for somebody else. The production world started with this nutty like 12, 14-hour day. And then so suddenly like 12 means a half day is 6 hours. Well, like a normal person that works a shift somewhere, like you're working 8 hours, right? 9 to 5. So there's a solution to the 12-day rate and the half-day rate. And that's something I was very fortunate to get introduced to when I was in high school. I was working part-time after school as a utility running cable through stadiums for live telecasts, you know, from the truck to a camera position. And that's what's known as the portal to portal. And the idea there is, like, I would get out of school, I would drive over to the shop, the truck company, and the clock would start for me. You know, I punch in just like any other kind of, I think, hourly worker. You get to work, the clock starts. And then I would get in the big TV truck, we'd commute out to the stadium, run all my cable, patch everything in, and then we would go back to the station and clock out. And that was the idea, you know, portal to portal. I had to cover my time to get from my house to work, but once I was in work mode, the clock is running. I mean, behind the wheel or opping a camera, like you're occupying the same amount of my day, and really I should be compensated for that. So that same idea extends into a lot of these field assignments for video production. And because in my case as a director of photography, camera person that owns my own camera gear, basic lighting and audio, I've got my own truck. And for me, I consider as soon as I jump in that truck, the clock has started. I'm commuting, you know, whether or not it's from my driveway, or for many years I had an office and a warehouse. So same idea. If I left the truck at the shop, I wouldn't charge for my time to get to the shop, but as soon as I get in the work truck and I'm on my way to location, clock is running. And again, that's somewhat negotiable. Like, if I bid on a job that's 3 hours from my home base and I'm competing against someone that's local to that other market, I can't really enforce my portal to portal rule. I'm like working against myself there. But in most cases, most of my work, if it's local, I can do the portal thing. And that is my answer to the half-day rate, is I just always quote the portal rate to start. If it's truly a 10-hour on site, I can backfill a little bit with a little extra labor. And if they say, hey, that rate's kind of high, or I don't need you for that many hours, what's your half-day rate? And then I can break down, well, it's portal to portal, you're 45 minutes away, we got to load in, we got to set up, we shoot. So even though you only need me for 3 or 4 hours on site, once I factor in commute on each end and the turnaround time, you know, it kind of turned into a full day rate. So what I do is I quote portal to portal, but it's less than my 10-hour on-site rate. And that's just my uniform number. And I've established that as my minimum day rate. And that's my solution to that last minute phone call that wants me to go out and jump on something for $500. I'm like, doesn't meet my minimum, I'm sorry. I stay pretty busy with this type of work. This is a little outside my scope. And thank you, but it's just not the right fit for me right now. So to recap, you know, you gotta start somewhere, pick a number, and that's what you quote when you get calls. And if you're not successful at booking, then, well, you know, it sounds like you're probably charging too much for the market, or your experience level at that point, you know, try a little bit lesser of a rate, see if it sticks. And then as you build momentum at that lower rate, that's when you have the opportunity, maybe at the fresh start of the next calendar year. That's when I like to do it, is January 1. I'll do a bump. And there's a gaffer in Orange County I worked with for many years, Bernie. He's got a bunch of social channels, the Apple Box Network. Great guy. He's like the king in that market for grip and lighting. And his mantra is always raise your rate $50. You know, start of next year, across the board, just bump it up $50. That's your new number. Some customers are going to drop off, and that's stressful in the moment, but long term, and I'm living proof of that, as is Bernie, it opens the door. As soon as you drop someone, it's really an opportunity for you to move up a rung on the ladder, get the bigger rate, and get the higher quality work. So this is the first in a 3-part series. I've been putting together an outline on these travel jobs the last couple months while I'm sitting in hotel rooms and driving on the interstate. I've got a bullet list of 10 ways I book cinematography jobs, and then I've got another 10 examples of losing big clients to advance in my career. And so those will be coming up in the following weeks. Love to hear your experience and perspective, and we can continue the conversation in the comments below. Thanks so much.